Mr. Paul A.Goble, thank you very much for being with us. Now, December 7th, the meeting supposed to take place in Brussels is not happening, but now there are talks going on that the Pashinyan and Aliyev meeting may take place somewhere in Russia before the end of the year. Your reaction?
Well, it's unfortunate that the meeting didn't occur in Brussels. On the other hand, there has been a continuing meetings between the two and also lower level officials. So a delay or a shift in where a meeting takes place shouldn't lead us to make any dramatic conclusions. My own guess is that we're still a ways from resolving a lot of the important questions, and that it's a lot more meetings are going to have to take place. I'd like to see them in various places. The important thing is that the most important players in these meetings be the leaders of Azerbaijan and the leaders of Armenia, rather than any outsiders. Until the two sides can reach agreement essentially on their own, it's really the outsiders can help, but the idea that some outsider would impose a settlement or only with some outsider is a settlement possible almost certainly guarantees that we won't move forward very quickly.
So do you think that those meetings in Russia, they do not hinder the peace process? Do they actually help?
Well, since I believe that the Russian government doesn't want peace, doesn't want a settlement, but rather wants to maintain tensions between Azerbaijan and Armenia so that Russia can continue to play its role of playing one group off the other in the hopes of maintaining its own position. Obviously, I would prefer to see meetings not in Russia and elsewhere. Having said that, if in fact you have a conversation between the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia, and that's what the most important thing is, its exact location of the meeting matters less than I think we might think. If having a meeting in Russia means that the Russians are dictating conditions, then I think that's very unfortunate. If there's a meeting there and the two sides are negotiating face-to-face and reaching agreement with each other, then that by itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
So what do you think is happening now? Is Russia already reached three communiques or declarations with the parties?
So well, that's just exactly it. The Russian government loves to have declarations. It doesn't have agreements. None of the declarations constitute real agreements. They aren't specific enough. They are much more expression of intention than agreement on what's actually going to be done. Saying that you want to reopen communications and transportation routes is fine. But until you have an agreement that says this one is going to open at this time and this one is going to open at that time and they're going to look like this and they're going to have this kind of arrangement as far as customs are concerned, until you have those kinds of things, you don't have an agreement. It was a big mistake on the part of many people to see these three declarations as agreements. They were often described as agreements, but in fact they were declarations. They were expressions of intention. And the Russian government is delighted to have that, because then what happens, and it's happened after each of these, and it will happen after every single declaration that the Russian government manages to arrange, is that each side will go away confident that it knows what the declaration means, because the declaration isn't specific. So that, for example, after the November declaration at the end of the 44-day war, Azerbaijan was extremely confident that it would be seeing the opening of the Zengezur-Syunik transportation route. The Armenians were equally confident that nothing like that was going to happen until something was done about the question of final status. So, what I think we have to expect is that the Russian government can be counted on to arrange declarations, but those are not agreements. And what we should be interested in now, especially now, 2 years after the war, is that we really need some agreements, and the agreements are going to require tough negotiations. They're going to require a great deal of specificity. We need to know exactly what each side is committing itself to. Even the issue of the delimitation and demarcation of the borders. Yes, all three of those declarations signed by the two leaders say that we're committed to delimitation and demarcation. But delimitation is a huge task, especially in an area where there are exclaves or enclaves, depending on your point of view, where the exact location of the border is very much a matter of dispute. Different maps show different places where there's no statement about which map is definitive. The question of demarcation, which is vastly more complicated than delimitation. Delimitation means you agree to a line on a map. Demarcation means that you establish an actual border and with border crossings. And that means that the two sides have to agree on exactly what those border crossings are going to look like, where they are located, how they'll be staffed, how traffic across them will be handled, what will happen in the event of controversy at any of these places. Those are huge issues. And the mistake that was made, and the Russians counted on this mistake being made, was that many people in Azerbaijan and many people in Armenia and many people everywhere else thought that making a declaration that you wanted these things was an agreement. No, it's simply saying what you'd like to have happen, but it isn't saying what that state will be to get to that point. So we're still a long way from those kind of concrete, specific statements that constitute an agreement. I don't expect, if there's a meeting, if meetings take place primarily in Russia, that we will see very many agreements reached. I think one of the promising things about having meetings in Europe is that the Europeans, like the Americans, actually would like to see a settlement. Europe and the United States believe that both Armenia and Azerbaijan will be better off if there's an agreement, because they will then be in greater control of their own fate and less dependent on what Moscow decides. For precisely that reason, Moscow doesn't want a final agreement, whatever it says. It wants to continue to have declarations. If the Russians remain the dominant player in the conversations, then we will have declaration after declaration after declaration, but there is little chance we'll have an agreement. That's why I'm pleased to see that the two leaders have spent more time in Europe than they have in Russia in recent months, and I think that's a good thing. It's not by itself a guarantee, but it's a positive thing, because you have, on the one hand, a Western European and American position, which is to support an actual agreement on the key issues, and a Russian position, which is not to have an agreement, to allow the Russian forces, so-called peacekeepers, to remain where they are for an indeterminate period, to allow Russia to stir the pot whenever it suits its purpose, to play divide and rule politics against Azerbaijan and Armenia, to keep the region unstable so that Russia can maintain its influence. If there were a real, honest to God, total peace settlement tomorrow between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Russian influence in the South Caucasus and elsewhere beside would drop precipitously, and the Russians know it. And because they know it, they're not interested in it. Whereas the Europeans and the Americans recognize that if there were such a genuine peace settlement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, both of those countries would be better off. Transit east-west would be much eased, and that would benefit not only those countries, but it would benefit the West as well. So we have to understand that, and we have to begin with the understanding that declarations are not agreements. They're not. They're statements of intention at most, and each side walks away from those declarations thinking it knows what they mean, with absolutely no arrangements in place that guarantee that it will have to live up to agreements or live in a way that the other side will accept. That works to Russia's benefit. It works against Baku. It works against Yerevan. And we just have to understand that. Otherwise, we will fall into the trap, which has been carefully laid by our Russian friends, of thinking that declarations are agreements. They're not.
Mr. Goble, lately Azerbaijan has been vocal about the transportation of illegal weapons to Karabakh in the territory that has been supervised by the so-called Russian peace contingency. Now, the head of the Russian contingency, General Volkov, says that an agreement has been reached, that there will be a new mini, how he puts it, customs point or checkpoint will be established there with the X-ray and scanner that will monitor what is being gone, what has been sent to Karabakh. Now, how serious is it? Do you think?
Well,
this
first off, what's necessary is a disarming of illegal units and a dramatic reduction of the number of guns in private hands. The problem in Karabakh with respect to weaponry has less to do with the Armenian army and its supply from Armenia itself than it does with the large number of irregular units whose arms are coming in a variety of directions. In order to take control of the situation, it's going to be necessary to disarm those. That starts by enforcing when those groups engage in violent actions, going after them, confiscating the weapons, disarming these groups. That is something that the Russian peacekeepers pledged to do in the past, but haven't done. What they're trying to do now is to suggest that the problem can be solved exclusively by setting up customs border checkpoints. But that does nothing to deal with the enormous number of guns already inside the Armenian portions of Karabakh, and that have been used in violence over the last several years. Until you have a comprehensive approach, there's got to be a disarming of these what we would call in most places illegal armed formations. The Russian government in the November and January declarations said that it was going to do something about that. It hasn't happened. That gives the most recent statement by General Volkov less credibility than he would like. And it suggests to me, in fact, that what he's trying to do is to raise a smokescreen suggesting that somehow, if Azerbaijan establishes these border posts, then the problem's solved. Well, would it be better if those border posts, checkpoints with X-ray machines and all that existed? Certainly. Is that going to solve the problem? No, it's not, because you have a large number of people with guns in illegal formations inside the Armenian area in Azerbaijan's Karabakh who continue to use them. Until that is stopped, and supposedly the Russian peacekeepers, quote unquote, were going to do that, you're going to have a problem. So, uh, I would be thrilled if General Volkov, who's making claims about an accord, would provide us with a copy of the text of that accord and who signed it and when. My guess is, without knowing for sure, but my guess is that this is another example of a Russian declaration rather than a statement of a report of an actual agreement. But as I say, I can't say that with certainty because I don't know. But it would be, let's just say, it would be a very different Russian approach if it's an actual agreement as opposed to another statement of intention rather than reflecting real agreements between Baku and Yerevan.
Now, one of the primary parts of the discussion in Sochi between Putin, Pashinyan, and Aliyev was some kind of mandate for the Russian contingents in Karabakh. Now, only a couple of weeks after we see these developments happening, when the General Volkov is kind of portrayed or positioned as someone who kind of makes things happen, who can resolve the conflict, so on and so forth. Do you think Russia's persistency to get some kind of mandate, like 25 years for Russian forces to stay in the region, has a potential for realization? And what would it mean for the region?
Well, I very much hope that it doesn't happen. First off, I don't think Azerbaijan wants foreign troops on its territory. The Russian so-called peacekeepers don't qualify under international law as a peacekeeping contingent because the Russians are party to the conflict, having a military base in Armenia. So the idea that they are peacekeepers and could be there under a peacekeeping mandate is as an absurdity from the point of view of international law. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what I think it says a lot that what Putin wanted out of Sochi was to try to, rather than worry about getting actual agreements on borders, getting actual agreements on the opening of transportation corridors, what he wants is the Armenians to insist and the Azerbaijanis to somehow be willing to agree to a dramatic extension of the Russian military presence on Azerbaijani territory. After the 44-day war, the November declaration said this was for a 5-year term, that it was limited, and that has certainly been the position that Azerbaijan has maintained. Clearly, the Russians and to a certain extent the Armenians would like to change that because they see a continued Russian presence as working against Azerbaijan and working for Armenia. So that's what it is. It shouldn't have surprised anyone that at Sochi that was what Putin wanted. If Putin really wanted a settlement, and I'm absolutely certain he doesn't, he would have been talking about borders, he would have been talking about status, he would have been talking about transportation routes. That wasn't what he was worried about. What did he want? 25 more years for the Russian contingent on Azerbaijani territory, imposed by some kind of international agreement, rather than at the invitation of the Azerbaijani government. He was trying to use Armenia, as he has before, to achieve a goal of putting Russian troops on Azerbaijani territory to weaken Azerbaijan's ability to pursue its own independent foreign policy and domestic policy, for that matter. So I don't think General Volkov is a miracle worker. I think General Volkov is doing exactly what the Kremlin wants, and I think your reference to the discussions at Sochi show exactly what's going on here. It's not about a settlement. It's about maintaining a crisis, so that an outside power, namely the Russians, will have the ability to have greater influence in Azerbaijan and retain their influence in Armenia than is good for either of those countries or the region as a whole.
Mr. Goble, 2022 changed a lot, the world a lot. And I would like to hear your thoughts about what to expect about Russia's future, Russia's political leadership future in 2023, and also how it's going to affect the region.
Well, almost 90 years ago, the great Azerbaijani writer Chemen Zemileh wrote a book entitled Between Two Fires. And the fires he was referring to were Russia and Iran. I must say that book could easily be reissued now and updated to include the events of the last year. Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine is failing. It has called into question the ability of the Russian military to function well. It has highlighted the heroism of the Ukrainian people, the resolve of the West to help, and it probably has seriously weakened Vladimir Putin and even raised questions about how long he will remain in power. I've read many commentaries in the last few weeks where people are saying that they really don't expect Vladimir Putin to be in office a year from today. Russia is likely to be fundamentally transformed in the next year, largely because of Mr. Putin's very foolish and criminal invasion of Ukraine. So there are going to be major changes flowing into 2023 because of the events beginning on February 24th by Mr. Putin and expanding his invasion of Ukraine. Similarly, in south of the Araks, in Iran, you have not only the popular uprising, which has forced the Ayatollahs to back down, to ban or eliminate the morals police, to allow women to go about without the hijab and much else. Once people see that their opponents are willing to make concessions, they're almost certainly going to demand more. And so the year ahead, south of the Araks, certainly promises to be an interesting and complicated one. And related to that, of course, is the issue of southern Azerbaijan, of the roughly a third of the population of Iran, which is Azerbaijani Turkish, a group of people that President Aliyev recently made mention of about 10 days ago by saying that we're very concerned about their status, and we're very concerned also about the secular values of the Azerbaijani state. While it's true that the Azeris south of the Araks are vastly more Islamic than the Azeris north of the Araks, because Azerbaijanis south of the Araks weren't subject to Soviet rule, whereas those north were, it's still true that the Azerbaijanis south of the Araks are concerned about their language rights, are concerned about their understanding of Islam, their control of their own mosques. And so that, combined with the fact that the Iranian rulers have sent troops up to the Azerbaijani border in the last couple of months, means that south of Baku, issues are going to be percolating throughout the next 12 months. I think 2023 may be a time of even greater tectonic shifts in this region in particular than any year we've seen in the last 30. And it's very difficult to be certain just how things will work out because so many factors are involved. But I think the best way to put it is that the world we're going to see in December of 2023 in the Caucasus and the greater Caucasus area is going to be fundamentally different than the world that we're seeing now, probably with a much weakened and quite likely subdivided Russian Federation, very possibly with an Iran with an entirely different government, or descending into kind of violence, sectarian and ethnic violence, that could make it a danger to itself and its neighbors as well. So this is what's happened this year makes next year look even more exciting and interesting than I think anyone would have thought possible 12 months ago.
Sub-modified Russia. Could you please elaborate on that?
Oh, subdivided.
Oh, subdivided.
What I mean is that it's very, very unlikely, if it becomes obvious to everyone that Russia has lost the war in Ukraine, that Putin has to go, that Russia needs a new arrangement, that Moscow will be able to hold all the pieces together. There are some that are certain to go, there are others that are likely to go, and there is still a third group that might go if they see the others being successful about it. If you talk to people a year ago, people who said the Russian Federation is going to fall apart were viewed as marginal extremists. Now, if you talk about the coming apart of the Russian Federation, that's very much a mainstream discussion. And I think that reflects the development in the region, that, you know, you have the Ukrainian government declaring Chechnya to be under temporary Russian occupation. Well, that's a very dramatic thing to say, even as an ideological proposition in time of war. It is to call into question the borders that the Russian government thinks are its own, just as the Russian government has called into question the borders of Ukraine that were recognized internationally. So I don't expect the Russian Federation to be in one piece by December 23. And I'll end this remark by saying what I have said so often before: don't buy any maps. Buy stock in companies that print maps, and you'll probably make money because the maps are going to change.